Hey, this is Ant from Your Property Network, and today we're talking about when property development and how to avoid some of the pitfalls along the way, how to avoid some of the mistakes that property investors turned property developers can commonly make, and who better to join me on this call than my good friend and an old friend of YPN's, Richie Clapson. Richie is... Well, we know him from Property CEO, the go-to guys out there for training new and aspiring property developers. So, Richie, for the very few people who don't know who you are, should we start with a potted history?
Oh, we could do. I don't know how long we've got, but okay. I'm a chartered structural engineer by profession. I've been in this industry without giving my age away over 40 years. Okay, so I must have started extremely young. And throughout my career, I've been involved running a number of businesses, being, I suppose, a backbone to what I did, and indeed property development. Sold out my engineering business back in 2008, just before the crash. Come out of that quite nicely, carried on doing developing. And from that journey, I've always been training property developers or people to become property developers, either new people to get into it, buy-to-let landlords, maybe people that's done flips, that sort of thing, or existing developers to do it better. I actually retired about 15 years ago, and now I spend pretty much most of my time just training people to become property developers, which is such an honor to take people on a journey and help transform their life.
And over the last I guess, sort of several years, we've worked closely with you. We've featured many of your students in editions of YPN Magazine. I've had the pleasure and privilege of speaking to those people who have, I don't think they'd mind me saying this, but ordinary people who've achieved extraordinary things in property with the support and guidance and structure and a blueprint provided very neatly by Property CEO.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting. Structure, blueprint. I mean, those are key things for anyone that is an ordinary person to go and do it. And I think they're all fairly ordinary people, but I mean that as a compliment. And they're not all property experts. And even those that have had a go at development, they're not educated. And so taking them and molding them and steering them to success is the reward that I get out of it.
Okay, fab. Well, let's start with, where's the best place to start then, actually? So people come into this, I would say, maybe like me, sometimes they've had some buy-to-let experience, or they've developed some HMOs, or maybe they've done kind of very, very kind of smallish projects like refurbs stretching into slightly bigger than that, like 1 beds to 2 beds, that kind of thing. And then probably like me, want to take a step up the deal chain, understand that there can be significant, actually life-changing profits that can be made from these types of deals. And at that point, we're ready to make every mistake in the book, but we're confident and we're enthusiastic and eager. And where do we commonly go wrong? Is it the type of property that we're looking at? Where do I go wrong, Richie?
You go wrong. Well, I don't know where you go wrong. We'll keep that one as a separate discussion. But I think, where do people go wrong, as you say, when they're moving up that deal chain? The first thing is, I suppose a lot of people think it is a deal chain and you have to work your way up. And the reality is you don't. If you want to start in development, you can start in development. It's not for everyone, but you indeed can. And I think it is choosing the right type of deal to start with. And people that have come from a buy-to-let background are sort of fairly hands-on. And a lot of people quite like a flip. It's very difficult to get a flip to work these days, with the average profit out of a flip, the government tells us, is 22,000 quid. So that can get wiped out really quickly. So people then go, right, okay, I need to go beyond that, because £22,000, which is very nice, it's not life-changing sums of money. We want to be thinking probably about 200, 300, 500, 800, a million. Those are life-changing monies which you can bring out of a deal. And so then the starting point is, well, what type of deal do I want? And this is where perhaps the first mistake gets made. And this could be a catastrophic one for a lot of people, because a lot of people, I would say 80-90% of people go, I want to do some land development. That's what I want to do. I want to build some houses, get myself a bit of land and build 3 or 4, 5, 6 houses. That sounds great. And it sounds great, but the planning system in this country is broken. There was a BBC documentary on recently, and it talked about the average planning proposal time to get approval is now 2 years. Now, clearly some stuff's done quicker, but indeed some stuff takes longer. So the problem for a lot of people is you dive into this, they try and go for planning, and then the planning permission doesn't come through. And they purchase a site, and generally sites which are in high demand and low availability command a premium. And so they pay a premium for a site, they hold a site, they either take 2 years to get planning, if they get it in 12 months, okay, better, but still 12 months, or they don't get planning. And they shed out typically £20,000 to £30,000 to get planning on a site these days. That's what it would cost you by the time all the additional reports are asked for. And then they go try and make some money out of it. Now, of course, you can, but you're on a long way down that journey. And the planning risk is huge and mustn't be underestimated. And I always look at this as a business. And I go, think of this as a business. Be a business person. And what you don't want is someone else having control of your business. If you want to open a business, control your business, minimize risk. If you go down the planning route, the planning department, the planning officer has control of your business. So there is a far easier route, which the government give us. The government give us permitted development rights. Now, a lot of people will have heard of that, but fundamentally it is the right to take a commercial building and convert it to residential. And commercial buildings are often half the price of residential property. So you get a lot more for your money if you're coming out of a sort of buy-to-let or a flip background. And you're able to make a big uplift in profits. And legislation supports you. Unlike anything else in property, the government are supporting property developers because we need to build 1.5 million homes. So if you go down the permitted development route, you're still getting that big uplift that we want in development. We get a big uplift in land, but we've got to go through the planning system. In permitted development, 56 days is the application period. And if it doesn't come through within that time, you have an automatic right to carry on. And so that thereby minimizes risk. So people that go down the planning route and new build, that's the first mistake a lot of people. And then the other one they often make is that they go into conversion, they look at a listed building. Oh, I like a listed building, grade 2 listed building. Bit of heritage, I've got a bit of a passion for that. A little bit of emotion creeps in. Avoid listed buildings because you now have someone else in charge of your business called a conservation officer. And some of them are great in this country, but some of them are a complete pain. So conservation officers now have a control over your business. So really what you want is a very simple, straightforward scheme. A straightforward office, light industrial building, a shop, a restaurant, a cafe. Convert that to residential. That's the great place to start. Don't make mistakes by going in the planning system. That's the first one most people make.
Okay, fab. And if we just expand on that just a little bit as well. So what would the typical building that we look like be? Because we say commercial buildings and some people might be thinking, oh, well, I know there's a pub that's kind of shut down the road from me. And hey, there's plenty of those about these days. That would make a great houses, flats, whatever it might be. But I'm guessing that might not be the easiest route.
Don't do a pub. Okay, there's a list. Okay, there's a list of certain buildings that are available under this permitted development right. And it's not every building in this country. So that list is any building that's in what we call use class E. And it is things, like I said, offices, restaurants, cafes, light industrial, indoor recreational centres, but it's not pubs. It's not churches, okay? There's a lot of sort of gospel hall churches, those sort of things that come on the market. Pubs, as you say, especially. And the question often comes up, oh yeah, but what if it's a pub that's been closed for 10 years? No, it's still a pub. What if it's a pub that's burned down? No, it's still a pub. It's just burned down. And there are various buildings that are protected or not available for conversion under permitted development rights. So yeah, it's knowing the list. And that is, again, a mistake. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of people that still come to me and say, oh, I've heard, someone told me you can convert a pub. What if you convert a pub into a restaurant, or when is a restaurant a pub or a pub a restaurant, that old argument, and then you can convert it, but you might get blocked. It might be you get permission to turn it into a restaurant, but there is a statement that often goes in from the planners and for no other use. So they fall foul of that trap. And the problem is what they often have done, and this is a mistake, they've Googled. Okay, Google's great, AI's great. And you can go and Google and search on AI for can you convert pubs? And of course, Google AI searches can only search the information that historically has been out there. That's what's available. Okay. And there were opportunities to convert pubs. Going back a few years, we could convert pubs. And there's a few people that talk about converting pubs. But right now, you can't. So yeah, you've got to be up to speed with this, and you've got to know the types of buildings, because otherwise you go and buy a building, it looks cheap, it looks attractive, and then you can't convert it. You've got to go in the planning system.
Okay, so we've got a shopping list with the types of buildings that are going to fit our criteria. And I guess that shortcuts the conversations that we're having with commercial agents and, whoever we might be, deal sources, whoever it might be, we're able to say this is specifically what we're looking for, rather than that kind of, have you got any buildings I could convert, which I guess is,
Or have you got
we can see where that would lead.
a lot of new uneducated developers would go to a commercial agent saying, you got any good deals? It's like, well, you're not going to walk in and ask for a bad deal. And you immediately show your hand as an uneducated, uninformed, probably going nowhere newbie. And you don't want to do that.
Okay, brilliant. Great advice. Thank you. Now, when I've seen you talk online, in real life at events, you quite often refer to kind of property development as a process. And I'm interested in this because we've found our great project. It ticks the box in terms of, it falls under the class to be enabled for permitted development. I've agreed a deal on it. I've got a great purchase price. Everything looks good. And now what? Because quite often we're new to this and we can look quite naive in terms of like maybe looking at the architect and the planning consultant and a builder as if like, well, tell me what to do next. I don't know if you've seen that from people who've perhaps not followed your program, and we look a bit like a fish out of water.
And I've looked the same. Okay. So, I wasn't born being a developer. I wasn't born a structural engineer. Okay. But as I grew into industry, my introduction to the property industry was as a structural engineer, designing buildings. And there was a day that I transitioned to be a developer and did exactly what you've just described there, and realized that even as a structural engineer and industry professional, I didn't really know what I was doing as a developer. And so I very quickly learned that I had to learn how to be a developer and how a developer acted. And ultimately, I guess that journey that I went on has borne out the system that you mentioned there, that I talk about. And the system that I've developed is called the 8 pillars. The reason it was 8 pillars, I'm a businessman. I don't class myself as a developer or as a structural engineer or as an entrepreneur. I'm a businessman, and that's what I do. And I've grown businesses. I've invested in businesses over the years, lots of different businesses, lots of different industries. And I learned a great process over many years in business, which was based around 8 pillars. And every business, and I don't do a lot of it these days specifically per se, but occasionally I do a bit of talking. I used to lecture on building businesses. And businesses all fell into 8 pillars. It's a really nice set of numbers, and you've got all the processes in there. And what I learned is that those 8 pillars that I used to teach would apply to any business. Whether you were, you were selling cars, you were selling finance, you were an accountant, you were opening restaurants, every business fell into these 8 pillars. And it could be about finance, it could be about marketing, it could be about HR and so on. And what I then developed was the 8 pillars process specifically for property development. Now, when I hear people talk about strategy, I often cringe a little bit because people go, well, what's the next strategy? Forget strategy, think business. Think about the next property business sector area or the next business strategy that you want to be involved in, and think business. And if we then think beyond our own worlds that we're in, which is I did many years ago, I tried to look at what businesses were successful. And every successful business, or hyper successful, let's think of those businesses that roll out on huge scales. And the obvious ones are always things like coffee shops, Costa, Starbucks, Nero, whatever your poison is. All of those businesses have been so successful because they're built on systems. And basically, you could go and take a coffee franchise off a Costa, and you could be running a Costa within a few months, not because you knew how to run a coffee shop, because they give you all the manuals and all the processes. It's like a franchise model. And so why is property any business? Why is property any different? Why is property development business any different? It isn't. And so I developed the 8 pillars. And I developed the 8 pillars and made sure that when people followed that process, they didn't make all those common mistakes that you don't need to make. So you don't fall down rabbit holes that you didn't know were there. You don't miss out on opportunities as well on the positive that you didn't know how to create. And so the system has been refined and refined and refined over the years. And within the system are some of the industry systems. So I have 8 pillars, and in one of those systems is a process called the RIBA workflow processes, which is the Royal Institute of British Architecture. It's not my system, but it's a subsystem that I refer to within my systems. And so if you want to be successful in business, see someone that's been there before, that has been successful, that's written the system. And if the system makes sense to you, follow it. And that is absolutely key, because the people that don't follow the process of the system, so if I wanted to open a coffee shop, and I have no passion, I can tell you, to open a coffee shop, but if I did, I could open Ritchie's coffee shop and I'd probably give it a reasonable go. But if Costa or Starbucks opened next to me, they'd wipe me out, because they would be so much more efficient. Probably their coffees would be better. Their food would be more organized. It'd be a better selection. They'd be much more profitable. So why would I not open a Costa's if I just wanted to be successful? If I had a passion for doing my own, so be it. So actually, if you want to be a property developer, follow the process of a system that someone's been there before. Do not wing it, because I hear this so many times. People say, oh, Google it, AI it now. It'll tell you how to be a property developer. Yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff out there. We give away loads of free stuff, on our YouTube channel and our books. There's loads of free stuff. But you can't learn everything about the system out of a book. And so it is, get the knowledge, understand it, follow the system. Why wouldn't you? The system makes any business successful.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And I probably should have dealt with this one before, actually, but because it's a big one, I think. And that's, you must see this all the time. Enthusiastic, aspiring property developers come to you and, hey, I've got a great deal, Richie. I've got this project and here's a spreadsheet and here's some numbers in it. And I know from my kind of limited experience of development that spreadsheet, it was nowhere near comprehensive enough. There were so many hidden costs that I just didn't know about. Didn't even factor in things like maybe like staging properties and so much stuff that are the provisional sums that we put in, they were nowhere near enough when our project actually happened. And so this getting the numbers right bit and trying to get close to getting those numbers and be comfortable with the numbers. Do you see that happen a lot? People kind of just, their back of the fag packet numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah. An expression which we all cringe at, I think.
There's 2 extremes. One extreme is the back of the fag packet type calculation. And I had a student come to me who had done some training with someone else out there. I don't recall who it was. I'm sure it was very good. But they had a little, I don't know if it was an app, but they had something on their phone. And they said, oh, we've got this little app that we go to a site visit, and we do a site visit, look at a commercial building, an old bank that we might want to convert because they've got permitted development rights. And all we do is we punch some stuff in our app, and then it gives us an offer that we can offer there and then. And it makes us look impressive. Well, the first thing is it makes you look a bit stupid. It makes it look like you've just been on a training course and someone's giving you an app, because there's no seasoned developer out there that will walk around the building, pull out a phone, click a couple of buttons and go, this is my offer. You don't do it. You just don't do that. You make it look like you've learned something, but you've probably not learned the right stuff. You're trying to be too clever. And the reality there is you are back of a fag packet, and what you're punching in is not necessarily all encompassing. So you could make an offer, but you don't know the validity of that offer. As you say, have you missed the staging? Have you got the finance costs? So all of those things are so important. The other extreme is I met a student some years ago who again, I was speaking at an event, and he said, could I buy you a drink afterwards? I just want to run something past you. Absolutely no problem at all. So we sat down afterwards, and he bought me a drink, and he opened up his laptop and he had a spreadsheet, and it was complex beyond belief. And he'd been trained. And so I think the lot of this is get the right process for this. Okay. And I said to him, okay, what's your question? He said, well, it doesn't seem to be working. Okay, I said, where does that number come from? Well, it has lots of pivot tables, if people know what they are, and it's linked to this and linked to, it comes from this sheet. Okay, where does that come from? It comes from that sheet. How's that generated? Well, that's generated by that number there, £2,000. Where's that come from? Oh, I don't know. I was just told to put it in. And so he had an extreme example, which was overly complicated, and it's like rubbish in, rubbish out. So he didn't know what he's talking. And so I think the key thing is a balance. a good calculator, a good spreadsheet that has all the identifiable things in it, but is relatively easy to see. And I'm a big favor of a great big button calculator. You know, those old calculators you can get. I always say to people, just do some very quick checks because spreadsheets are so easy to write over, but you've got to get your numbers right. Now, that I think is one big mistake that people make is not getting the numbers right, overbidding on projects. Many projects fall out of bed. Someone overbids, they go to the funders say, give me your analysis. The funders pull it apart because analysis doesn't stack up. They have to pull out the deal. That happens so many times. But the other thing is knowing the really important numbers, and the biggest number in any calculation analysis spreadsheet of whether a deal stacks up is the refurbishment costs. And there are many mistakes that you can make in getting that number right. The first mistake, again, is Google it. Okay. Or, as people often say, I've gone on to the BCIS, Building Cost Information Service. I'm going to subscribe to that and I'm going to download information. Well, you don't know what you're downloading. A little bit of knowledge is dangerous. The BCIS is a costing information platform that a lot of quantity surveyors use. And the reality is you need a cost consultant. You need a quantity surveyor. You know, don't attempt to do the numbers yourself because that's a mistake. It's the same argument. Why don't you lay the bricks? Oh, I'll leave that to a bricklayer because a bricklayer is going to be much better at it than me. Well, by the same argument, and even more importantly, the numbers that you put into your spreadsheet for the refurbishment of construction costs are probably the most important number. Get it done by a professional. And that is a big mistake that people make. They have a little guess, they have a little go, and it's often wrong. And again, they then go through this process. They bid on the deal, they try and get the money, and it falls out of bed. Worse still, sometimes they raise all the private money. They don't need to go to a commercial funder, in which case it doesn't get checked. They buy the building, and then the deal doesn't get delivered for the price they want. And they end up losing money.
Okay, that's actually really interesting because even when we get the numbers right, you know, if we get the numbers right, we have to make the right decision and the right movement in terms of financing this thing as well. You made a great point there about kind of the dangers of private finance, that there isn't those double checks and balances that a lender's going to have. They're not going to have their kind of experienced eye on, okay, does this deal really stack up? There's no safety net there if you're just going out and raising £1 million worth of private investor finance, which is absolutely doable. And we see it happen a lot. So what should we be thinking when we're thinking, okay, how am I going to finance this thing? What would be a better route than just saying, hey, I can just go and raise all of this money? What do you teach your students, and what typically do they kind of, the avenue that they pursue for?
Well, you're absolutely right. The big mistake will be to go total private funding because there's no secondary check, and you really want that. The other thing is you will always need, if you want to get into this business and start building life-changing sums of money, you're always going to need to borrow money. This is reality, okay? And there'll be a point when you run out of your own because deals turn up, more deals turn up, and so you need to borrow money. And it's a bit like, your 16, 17-year-old child that's grown up and you go, better get yourself a credit card, put a little bit of money on it, pay it off. Put a little bit of money on, pay it off, because you're now going to get some credit history. Because if you get no credit history, when you want to go and buy a car or you want to get your first mortgage, you've got no footprint. And it's much the same here in this industry. You want to build a reputation. So let's say you went out and just borrowed some private funds to do your first smallish deal, and maybe your second. Then you want to scale up, and then you go to a commercial lender, but you've got no track record with commercial lenders. Now, I'm not saying you won't get the money, but far better to build that track record and blend that finance together. So blend the private money and the commercial money together as one package, because not only do you have that advantage of getting that checking process done, but you also get the advantage of starting to build that credit history, if you like, and that reputation with that lender. And of course, that lender's probably been sourced through a broker. I mean, one thing to say, again, we're talking about what goes wrong. People chase the rate. Do not chase the rate. I get it. If you're trying to get your portfolio to work, the rate is all encompassing. But when we're talking about property development, whether your rate for your borrowing of your commercial money is 10% or 15%, it probably won't scupper the deal. Okay. So do not chase the rate. Go with a reputable funder. I certainly can see many a time that people have made mistakes like that, even I can tell you, even when I advise students, I don't recommend, but I always say I have certain brokers that come into my room. Well, if they come into my room, they're probably reputable. And then I sadly see a student who's gone down a road, found another developer because it was a really good rate. And this industry, what we have to understand, is largely unregulated. And they've ended up with penalization overrun costs, which are extortionate. Had one existing developer who came to me, and then I started to train him, get him doing it better. He went over by 1 day and had a £50,000 penalty, which he spoke to the owner of the funding company and said, "This is immoral." He said, "Yeah, it is, but it's in the T's and C's." So definitely blend the two sets of finance together, but do your due diligence and be very careful where you get the money. Do not just chase them.
Okay, brilliant. Great advice there. So I want to hark back to something you said earlier on about us not being born property developers. And when we move into this, we were discussing that you can feel like a fish out of water, and you are a fish out of water. All of a sudden, you're kind of swimming in a pond that, a much bigger pond than you've ever been in. You don't know you don't know who the sharks are, and it feels like everyone's there to kind of take a bite out of you. That was certainly my experience of sitting in a kind of a bigger project, being sat on a table opposite the contractor's quantity surveyor, and it felt like really what he was there to do was to beat me up and spend more of our money, and that's what he did. And I didn't really know my role. I didn't really know, how hard I should be fighting him, whether or not he was there to rip me off, whether or not the things he was telling me were real, or if they were kind of inflating the price somehow. I hope he's not listening to this, but for me he is. But that's how it felt. And I felt like an imposter in that room, probably because I was to a degree. So what was I doing wrong, and how can we overcome that to have a bit more authority in that situation?
So you use the word imposter, and imposter syndrome is the result of that. And I had it. I had it years ago. There are lots of things you have to do. And I think you have to expect, this is an industry which makes a lot of money. And when there's a lot of money, it does attract the sharks, and the sharks will try and take bites out of you. Absolutely. Okay. There are, I don't say unscrupulous, but a lot of sharp people in this industry. And if you're not sharp and on your game, then you are going to get bitten. And I think the problem is that we enter this often with confidence from our previous background. So I've had restaurateurs who have run some terrific restaurant businesses very successfully, super confident, and then become a mouse when they become a property developer. I've had people from the forces who have been on the front line. They're pretty strong characters, and then become a mouse when they become a property developer. And that's the old imposter syndrome. But what you've got to look at is you have every right to be there, and you are the CEO. In the name of my company, Property CEO, you are the CEO. You're the chief executive officer. So act like one. If you don't act like a CEO, people take chunks out of you. Now, I know that's easier said than done. And what we have to do is build you as a CEO. And we have to give you tools, and we have to give you backup and gravitas. And this is, again, it's all part of the 8 pillars. This is what makes the system successful. And so if you look like a newbie and you act like a newbie and you act subservient, which is what people do, to the design team, to the contractor, even to the funders, then they will treat you like that. But if you go in with confidence and with gravitas on your side, they won't. Number one thing that we want you to be is the CEO. And a CEO doesn't need to know everything. And I learned many years ago that I don't need to know everything. I know quite a lot. But what I do know is how to ask questions. And if someone says to me, that's the RIBA workflow processes, and I didn't know what it was, I go, sorry, what's the RIBA workflow? Rather than go, oh yeah, okay, RIBA workflow. Because that's what people do. They become subservient. Someone spills some letters out. They go, oh yeah, okay, yeah. I don't know what that is, but I'll look it up this evening. Just ask. You're the CEO. I learned this. I bought a chemical distribution company in the marine industry many years ago for my son to run. And a great friend of mine said, what do you know about chemicals? I said, no, nothing. What do you know about distribution? Nothing. What do you know about the marine industry? I said, I've got a boat. Does that count? But what I learned was a process called the 5 whys. You can look up the 5 whys. Japanese used, I think it was Toyota. And the process is, as a CEO or as a manager, you just ask why. And when you drill down, by the time you get to the 5th why, and it's not just why, you go, well, why is that? Why is that an extra cost? Is there not another way around it? Can we do it cheaper? Once you start drilling down, you either are going to get an answer which says, oh, no, there is another way. We can do the alternative. Or you get, no, ultimately, we have to spend that extra. But you asking questions as a CEO, like any good CEO does, gives you a standing much higher than you being subservient. But even before that, before you go into, let's call it the lion's den, okay, where they're going to take bites out of you, you need gravitas way beyond your ability. And we teach, I think uniquely here at Property CEO, part of that safety net for you to have alongside you a non-executive advisor. We're the only people that teach this, and it's absolutely paramount. And if you want to know another mistake that people make is they don't listen to this advice. Even sometimes when I teach them, okay? Because people don't always listen, particularly entrepreneurs. But a non-exec advisor is not a director, not a non-exec director. They're not employed by you. But imagine someone like me. So let's say you want to be a new developer. You've done a buy-to-let portfolio, and you engage me to be your non-exec advisor. And what you say to me is, I'll tell you what I'll do, Richie. If you can just be there by my side, I'll give you 10, 20% of the profits at the back end. You're not going to pay me monthly. And actually, my mentality is I actually want to help you because I love to help people. You get to a certain age. The criteria for a non-exec advisor is grey hair or no hair. So I qualify at both camps, okay? And that's really important. It can't be someone who's been in the industry 5 years, 10 years. They've got to be in the industry 25, 30 years. Then they are often in a position where they want to help and they can help. And the number one thing they give you is gravitas. So you imagine, Anne, or anyone else imagine this, is if you walked into a meeting and the day you walk in and the design team, imagine those contractors were sat on the other side of your table as you described, wanting particularly the quantity surveyor to take a bite out of you and charge you extras, and you walk in with me. And particularly if they recognize me from the industry, as I'm recognized by a lot of people, I might be a non-exec in your area, so they actually know me geographically from that town, from that city, from that county. And you walk in with me, so I'd like to introduce you. This is Richie Clapson. He's my non-exec advisor. He'd be working with me on this project. I don't have to say anything. The mere fact that you have me alongside you raises your status. It gives you gravitas. And almost certainly from day one, that appetite to take a bite out of you is lessened significantly because they know that you're playing a different game. So having a non-exec advisor, learning some tools, having tools in your tool bag like the 5 whys, helps you get over that imposter syndrome effect and stop making those mistakes.
Okay, amazing advice. And, just imagining having like the power of someone like yourself, sat there next to me in what was those very terrifying meetings would have definitely taken the fear factor out of it. So we've got you on the team, Richie. Maybe we've got you on the team or someone like you. How important is the team that we have around us, and what mistakes do people make along the way there? I can think of a common one, having an architect project managing the build process. It's something you and I have talked about before in the past. It's easy to get swept along when we're new. I think by someone, where an architect is someone on authority. They know what they're doing. They've got many, many years of training, possibly many years in industry, and they might well be keen for the work and say, well, yeah, I can do that. I can do that for you. And who are we to know better at that stage? Use that as an example, but I'm sure there are lots of other ones in terms of building our team and even getting the right contractors in place as well. So perhaps you could just talk us through what we should definitely avoid when we're looking at the team that we surround ourselves with.
So you're absolutely right. You've got to get the right people. Just because it says architect on the team doesn't mean to say it's the right architect. So here's an example I often use, okay? I could take my Ford Fiesta to Rolls-Royce and they must service it. But are they the right people to service my Ford Fiesta or vice versa? No, they're not. So I've got to just because it says mechanic above the door, it's not necessarily the right person. So the first thing you want to have is industry professionals that are used to working on the type of projects you're working on. So what I don't want is I don't want an architect who solely built new build residential tower blocks in and across the city of London to work on my refurbishment of an old bank in Yeovil. I don't want that, okay? Because I've got the wrong person on my project. I've got my Rolls-Royce mechanic trying to service my Fiesta. So let's have the right people that fit the type of work that we do. I think that is important. And then it's getting the right people in the right roles. And I absolutely get it that many architects particularly love to project manage projects. And if we go back, let's get a bit of history of time. If we go back, Isabel Kingdom Brunel was an engineer. And engineers used to project manage projects. That's what they used to do, which I think worked quite well because an engineer generally is a methodical process type person. You can see that I've developed systems to run businesses and systems to run property development businesses. I'm a process person, I suppose. Ultimately, that's the way my brain thinks. We then transition to a period, just roughly, with architects project managing many projects. But architects, by their nature, are creative people. They've got a passion for the design and the flair. And they're waving their arms around all the time, which we love. And I want my architect to have that flair. But an architectural flair is not necessarily conducive to systems and processes. And when you understand and see the true systems and processes that is needed to project manage a project, all of the intricacies of the spreadsheets, the contracts that need to be drawn up, it's not architect's territory. It's not the right part of the brain. There are very creative people in life and there are process people. And so what we have now developed in the industry is project managers. It's a title or role that's developed that specialize in project managing. So why do I want my architect, who's really good at architecture, having a go at my project management? Because if I actually reverse that round, why don't I ask my project manager to come up with a new design for my building? An interior design, an external design, the architecture. You'd go, that's crazy. He's a project manager. Well, an architect's an architect. So choose the right people for the project. And I think then, you see, you also get, and this is where you need to stand firm, and the gravitas of your non-exec advisor also pushes back on this. So if your architect says, no, it's okay, I've done many a contract, I can do contracts, I pretty much guarantee you, I'm going to say 99% of the architects I've met do contracts, do not understand contracts. JCT contracts, I even heard an architect say the other day, and I wasn't in a position because I was just in a group and I was listening and I wasn't ready for me to criticize, but actually said, look, I can sort the JCT contracts out for you. He was talking to a developer. In fact, you can do them yourself. You can download a template. They're a strikeout contract. Do them yourself. You don't even have to pay me. Well, that's about the worst advice I'd ever heard, okay, for the entire year. Because first of all, even qualified, time-served project managers, the good ones, go out to specialist legal experts to put the JCT contract together. It might be a template contract, but if you do not strike it out or fill in the boxes correctly, you won't have the right contract to fall back on. And equally, you'll show your hand of how ignorant and uneducated you are, presenting to the contractor an inferior contract, which immediately then gives him a chance to start taking chunks out of you because he knows you're not up to speed. And so a good project manager has alongside them a sub-consultant to them, which will be a legal expert to help draft that contract for them. And so all of these people, the right architect, the right structural engineer, the project manager, and here's another one, okay? Don't try and have a go at these yourself. So I came across a project, and here's a mistake someone made. They started off right. They had a problem. Their contractor, these are two students of mine, okay? Their contractor, I said, got into bed with them in a friendly way, warmed them up, built a friendship. He knew what he was doing. And then he said to them, look, your project manager needs to get removed off the job. Your project manager's slowing the project up. Your project manager's not helpful. And they came to me and I said, do not get rid of your project manager. And the project manager was not giving the contractor extensions of time, signing off extras, because the contractor wasn't providing the paperwork. So the project manager was doing his job. My view, if a project manager and the contractor get on too well, the project manager's not doing his job. I want my contractor to not like my project manager. in a professional manner. And so they had this problem. What they then did, they got some advice, and it's about where you get advice from. So they got advice from someone else. And that someone else told them, look, you don't need a project manager. Get rid of the project manager, manage it yourself. You're quite a way through the build. You save yourself a load of money. So what did they do? They did it. Ironically, they come and ask my advice, and they were students of mine, yet they went and got rid of their project manager from an advice from someone else who, I get it, they thought had some experience and knowledge. But truthfully, they got the wrong advice, because I said to them, you do realise you're now in breach of your JCT, Joint Contracts Tribunal contract with your contractor. They said, no. Why? Because you don't have a project manager. You can't just take your project manager off and not replace them with a qualified project manager. You're in breach of your contract. Your contractor can now sue you. Ultimately, they lost about 100,000 on that project by that was the start of a few mistakes that they made by not following the process. And so, yeah, you can see here that comment, an architect, good intentions, but not the right person. Think of the project manager doing the architecture, or the architect trying to lay the bricks. Yeah. Or me, structural engineer, trying to do the wiring. Well, I'm colourblind, so I wouldn't better do the electrics anyway. But it's keep horses for courses and make sure they've got the right experience.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of that as well, working with the right set of builders as well. I've got very dear friend of mine is a QS, and for a big company, and we go out for dinner, and he's often saying, I've got this developer, he's a great guy, but I told him not to use these builders, but they're old friends, or they've worked together on previous projects. I told him not to use them, and they've gone bust halfway through the project, or, something else has happened, something else awful has happened, and he's kind of... He describes it as being the marriage guidance counsellor in the world's ugliest divorce on these projects. Going with a kind of known quantity, someone we've used on smaller projects who might be completely inappropriate for this bigger development deal. Is that something that you've seen happen, with not necessarily your students, but other people coming into this?
Yeah, I've seen it with definitely people coming into this. And I have to say, occasionally I have seen some of our students almost going down that road, because you're right, there's a relationship that's built, particularly people that's come from a background of some buy-to-let, some HMOs, some flips. I mean, a common thing I get when people often come to see me the first time they're on the program, I meet them in the room for their first session, and they go, I've got all my team. I go, what have you got? I've got plasterers, I've got plumbers, I've got electricians. You don't need them, because we're not going to be employing the individual trades. And people talk about builders. In fact, you use the word builder. And I like to use a distinction. I like to call them contractors. A builder is generally someone who's on the tools, and he or she turns up in their van. They could be the carpenter, electrician, and they manage the other trades. And the best way to tell, if they're going to give you a quote, they often turn up after hours in their van, in their builder's clothes. I want a contractor. I want a contractor, by definition, who's almost certainly got a head office with overheads. Yeah, they're going to have a cost consultant running all the projects internally. You talked about one of the contractors you worked with had a cost consultant. They're probably going to have an accounts department. They're going to have a meeting room. The guy or girl that comes and gives you the quote probably turns up in a car, in a suit, in the middle of the day. That's a contractor. Now, what I don't want to use is I don't want to use the people that I grew up with that did my buy-to-lets. Because the majority of the time, they don't have the expertise, or they do not have the scale of either their own business or of the right subcontractors to support the delivery of a much bigger project. Let's understand the model, okay? If we are going to try and build a development project, we are talking, a flip might cost you 30,000. A development might cost you 300. We're talking about a much bigger number. So what we need to make sure, and there are checks and measures, part of the systems, the ypn process, we teach people checks and measures that they know need to happen. Your project manager and your accountant can perform them for you, to check out the validity of a contractor, to see whether they are able to sustain the cash flow of this bigger development. So the number of checks that you might be looking at is, what are the size of their trade accounts? Because what will often happen, and this happens for a lot of people that give it a go, they meet a contractor, and the contractor says, oh, you're new to this, aren't you? I need a £50,000 upfront deposit. And they, oh, yeah, okay, I am new, I better pay that. Well, I can guarantee you that £50,000 never goes on your project. It robs Peter to pay Paul on the previous project, because a contractor has a trade accounts, and it has credit with its subcontractors. So if a contractor does 1 month's worth of work, it will buy all its trade materials in from its trade suppliers, and it won't get invoiced for those materials to the end of the month. And it's probably got a minimum of 14, but probably 30 days to pay their trade accounts. Equally, their subcontractors are not weekly paid lads with cash in hand. They're going to be subcontractors who are slightly better quality, better scale, who are going to invoice at the end of the month and will have either a 7, 14 or 30-day payment period. So your contractor does not need money up front. The only reason they need money up front is if their trade accounts are not big enough to cater for your size project and the others that they're doing, or they've run all their trade accounts up to the limit and they can't get any more credit, in which case you're providing the credit for them and it goes to someone else's project, or they just haven't got any trade supplies at all. And so a good contractor, you check out their scale. I'd often say you want to be about a fifth of a contractor's turnover. So it's the right size. And as you grow, you might change contractors. You don't always take the same people with you. And so if you've got a project which you're turning over, let's say 300,000, we want a contractor that's turning over about 1.5 million. And we also check out how much new work they have won. Because if they suddenly expanded, a builder that's turned into a contractor, and there's nothing wrong with that, the biggest reason that all businesses fail, as I bring it back to business, this is all business, is cash flow. They could look profitable on paper, but they fail because of cash flow. Because a builder cannot raise his credit rating, his trade accounts that quickly. They have to build them up over time and build a track record. So what we are looking for is a contractor where we're about a fifth of their turnover, and that's a fifth of their turnover they've done for a number of years, not just suddenly risen up to. We also look at what amount of work they've secured going forward. And of course, we take references from other developers and check them out. So there's a whole load that goes into this. It's definitely not, as you say, Anne, it's not your mate. It's not the one that you worked for in a previous development. And the final thing is we look for competition. We want to go out probably to 6, 7 contractors to get a minimum of 3 pricing, so we can compare and contrast on pricing.
Okay, brilliant, amazing advice. And I wanted to ask, as we come towards the end of this, I wanted to ask you about going over in terms of budget and timescale, something that probably everybody has done to some degree. Probably on most projects. It's rare to come in under budget and under time, I would imagine. So what can we do to mitigate that risk? And if it feels like the budget's spiraling out of control, or this project's going to take so much longer and therefore cost so much more money than we originally anticipated, what are the early alarm bells that we might miss? How can we mitigate that to try and get things back on track? And why does this typically happen?
Okay, so first of all, let's make the statement that every single property development project you'll ever do will go wrong. Okay, there is. That's out there. And they will. It's the degree that it goes wrong and how you can control it. Because everything goes wrong. We are working with lots and lots of guys and girls with lots of individual materials building some of our most expensive assets. And it's a lot to it. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of moving parts. What we must do is mitigate the chance of it going wrong before it ever gets to that stage. And that's the big mistake that a lot of people make. So a lot of people don't spend enough time at the beginning specifying and designing the detail of their project to get it priced. I want a kitchen. That's what I want. I want a kitchen. Okay. I want a kitchen and I'm looking for marble tops. That's what I want. Great stuff. The contractor prices your kitchen. Your contractor puts your kitchen in, you turn up on site and go, that's not the kitchen I wanted. I wanted marble worktops. They are. They're laminate, but they're marble effect. Look really nice, don't they? No, I wanted marble. And I didn't want these basic doors. These look really flimsy. Yeah, but it's a kitchen. You said kitchen, it's a kitchen. Because you haven't specified your kitchen. You haven't specified it's a Howden's XYZ. And I want a granite worktop X millimeters thick. Because then they come in different thicknesses. I want an upstand at the back. I want splashback tiling behind the hood, the cooker hood and stuff like that. So you have to specify to the nth degree. And this is a big change for people that's come out of buy-to-let HMOs, where they've gone on to site. The contractor says, where do you want the plugs and the sockets? Oh, we'll talk it through. No, you have to do all of that at the beginning. It's in the detail stage. You even specify the skirting board, the size of the skirting board, the profile. You might want some ornate skirting board about 150 mil thick, high. You might get a bull nose at 90 mil and go, what's the skirting board? Yeah, but that's not what I want for the type of quality flats. Well, you never specified, did you? You might go, that paint looks a bit thin on the walls. Well, it's just a trade emulsion from so. Well, no, I wanted Dulux. Well, you didn't say Dulux, did you? Yeah. And so everything has to be specified. And that is the problem. And I say this is an industry problem, not just for new developers, but for existing developers. Because what I think we need to understand in this industry, many existing established developers come out of a position where they never got properly educated and they don't follow processes. I mentioned a process earlier, the RIBA workflow processes, and that is a great workflow process, but many developers don't follow it. They don't even know about it. And that is about the detail. And when we go out and ask a contractor to price, we have to have all of the specifications, all of the detail scheduled out, all of the plug sockets, all of the light fittings. Are they brushed steel? Are they white? How many of them are there? Everything absolutely specified. Now, that takes time. What we do by mistake is we get onto site too quickly. We often feel as a new developer, let's get onto site, we're making progress. No, you're better to go to site 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later, and get everything specified. Because what that does, if we absolutely specify to the nth degree and the contractor prices it, well, first of all, there's less room for wriggling. I specified exactly that skirting board. I specified exactly how many double plugs I had, and they've got a USB or a USB fixing for my iPhone to be charged. I put it in there. It's all in there, okay? I specified that there were dimmer switches in the lounge and the bedroom, but not the bathroom. Everything specified. A touchscreen mirror. That's what I wanted. It's there. The contractor now has less room to wriggle and charge you extras. But from the contractor's point of view as well, all the contractor wants to do is maximize their profit. You've now given the contractor all the information. And so in the nicest way, the contractor says, well, off you go then, leave us to it. We now know everything apart from unforeseens or problems if we open up an existing building, we're trying to establish what goes on. Everything else we know about. So the contractors actually, we talked about how they view you at the beginning. They view you as far more professional, and they've got a bigger opportunity to maximize their profit because they just can get on with it. They don't need to keep going back asking questions every 5 minutes, which slows them up. So the first thing is get it right at the beginning. What often then happens, I talked about going out to tender. That's another milestone point, and the RIBA workflow processes are milestones. If your tender comes back and it's, say, £200,000 over, stop. You don't start the project. You stop, and there's a process we have called value engineering. When you sit around with your consultants, we bring in those 5 why type process again and say, right, okay, it's gone over. Where can we save £100,000 without affecting the end product? And when you get a bunch of consultants together, they're very creative. They've been in this industry for years. They will start trying to find ways, if you've got a contractor on board as well, of actually reducing the money but still delivering the end product. So you value engineer it. And then when we start the project, this is when the project manager comes into their own. Paperwork, processes are absolutely key. Again, part of the 8 pillars. I have a very, very simple rule that I teach, okay? For your project manager to run your contractor, the only person that can give the contractor an instruction is the project manager. You can't get sucked onto site where a contractor says, would you like, what about if I change the doors? What about if I move that around? You go, yeah, that's a good idea. And then they charge you an extra you didn't know about. No instruction that's priced, no authorization. So everything has got a CAI, contract administrator's instruction, whatever we call it, is authorized, and we do it. And so that paperwork and that process follows all the way through. And then many projects do overrun. Sometimes unforeseen, sometimes the British weather, we open up buildings, we find asbestos we didn't expect. Well, it depends whose fault it is. So once you have a control process in the way and you have the right JCT contract template filled out properly, if it's the contractor's fault, you've got something called liquidated and ascertained damages, which is fundamentally how much you're out of pocket. So if you have a project that overruns by a month and your finance costs were £10,000 a month, once you finish, you could charge them £10,000 a month if it was their fault that they didn't deliver within the contract period. So there are various stages that you mitigate these risks going through the process. It's not just when I get onto site.
Okay, brilliant. What a hugely comprehensive answer to that. So that's amazing. I want to ask just a little bit about these kind of, you were talking about, the buying the materials, specifying the materials, going to the nth degree to get it exactly right. One of the things we've heard you talk about previously is the procurement. I've got to try and say the word, like procurement process, actually, the process by which these materials are actually purchased. So can you tell us a little bit about what goes wrong or what can go wrong if we don't get this right?
Yeah. So procurement processes, okay, let's talk about the route that I encourage most students to go down, which is a fixed price lump sum, which manages your risk. Okay, you give me a price for £300,000, Mr. Contractor, to deliver that project in accordance with that detailed specification. Off you go. If you're late, I charge you. Simple. Okay, fixed price lump sum. Now, there are different procurement routes where often you'll get advised, particularly as a new developer by your project manager, hey, why don't we run individual trade packages? All that contractor's markup, because obviously the contractor's going to mark up. He's got a head office. He's got staff to pay for. You're going to pay for that. And the project manager says, well, why don't we I'll run individual trade packages for you. I'll bring in the electricians, the plasterers, the plumbers. I like to save you a load of money. Of course you go, yeah, absolutely. And of course, you go back to that point, you might listen to that industry professional because you don't know any better. Well, again, the reason to have a non-exec advisor alongside you. And if you were someone that worked with me, listen to what I've said, because I give all the pros and cons why these things aren't good. One of the things, if I looked at that procurement route that's not good, is that you are taking the financial risk. So where you have a fixed price lump sum, if that tender price comes back and it's not correct or it's not acceptable, we value engineer. We don't move forward till it is. When you're doing individual trade packages, they're all let separately throughout the project. So you actually don't know what your end price is until you get to the end. And if suddenly the plasterers turn up because they've been bought in, but the electricians aren't ready, well, who's paying that abortive cost? You are. Where if it's a contractor fixed price lump sum, that's their problem. Who's got to coordinate all of those subcontractors, because there's loads of them on a site, and all of their materials and where they're going to store, and all of those arguments that you get between subcontractors? Well, you have to, or your project manager does. But you are holding that financial risk. And of course, your project manager will want to be paid for that. Rightly so, but the saving you're expecting to make is often not there. And a lot of funders don't like it because you don't have security of the exit price, fixed price lump sum. So that is a big issue in terms of procurement. The big other mistake that I see people making, and again, I totally understand it, when they come from a background of buy-to-let HMO service departments, they've gone out and procured some of their own goods. I've got a great, kitchen supplier that I work with. I get my boilers cheap. I've got a company that I'm a membership of, and I get my boilers from them, and I save a lot of money. No, do not do that. Because what happens is you've now interfered with the procurement process. Because sometimes they go, I still do fixed price lump sum, but I'm going to supply the boiler or the kitchen or the bathrooms. This is a real case in point. Not a student of mine, but someone who was potentially going to be a student, but ultimately didn't, and I don't think was trainable, with all due respect. And she said to me, I want to supply all of my bathroom equipment because my contractor's making a huge markup. And so I met her at various events and I said, definitely do not do that. She said, I found it all on eBay. It's so much cheaper. I said, definitely don't do that. And I said, if you take it out of the contract, which you've signed a fixed price lump sum contract, the contractor's actually still due profit because he's makes profit on the materials. She said, I know. I said, yeah, but he's due that. That's his contract. And so he's still entitled to that profit. So he could charge you the profit. Now, as it happened, that contractor didn't. And the contractor said, no problem. We won't charge you the profit, but you're totally responsible for it. And we'll take out that provisional sum that we have for all the bathroom equipment. We'll take it out of the contract. So she then rang him and said, by the way, all the bathroom equipment's turning up on Friday afternoon. He said, no problem at all. Are you going to let them in? She said, no, I'm busy Friday afternoon. I have a lunch. And he said, well, we're not there. Part of what we charge you is to take the goods in and check them. So you'll have to be there and you'll have to take the goods in and check them off. Well, that ruined a Friday afternoon. And of course, they weren't all there. Some were damaged. So she had to go and source that. The following week, and the contractor was going to start putting the stuff in, and made a call and said, by the way, we got all the sinks, that's great, but where's all the traps, the connectors, the pipework? She said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, part of our price was all encompassing with all the pipework. You've just got the sink. Oh, I thought that was part of it. No, that's why your eBay price is cheap, because it's not all there. And then she was trying to order bits of pipework and it wasn't correct and got herself in a right muddle. And what you end up with, now that contractor, and the reason I got involved is because I knew the contractor. And so he was a bit of a friend of mine, and he was as good as gold to that developer because he didn't go for her, which he could have done. Because the problem is he could have claimed delays off of her. And so what you are doing is you're interfering with the legal contractual procurement process by supplying your own goods. So if your goods are late or faulty, the contractor can come back and claim off of you. And at the end of the day, what's more important? What I always talk to my students, yeah, they want to make money, but they want time. And so if you're getting sucked in and picking up boilers or bathrooms in the back of your car, you've not moved on from where you were running around with your buy-to-lets. Development, if you get it right, you make more money for less time. So get it right and don't get embroiled in procurement contractual issues.
Okay, fantastic advice. Thank you, Richie. And then just finally, if you could give one piece of advice to someone starting out in development and just to help them avoid things going wrong, one golden nugget, I think the term is, one piece of advice, what would it be to stop us making a complete hash of our first kind of step into property development?
I'm going to do the cop-out one, which is the easy one, but I'm going to think of another one. And the cop-out one is, I would say it, wouldn't I? But get educated, okay? Now, I retired 15 years ago and grew into education. I used to train people privately. Now I run Property CEO, and I love it. And I would say it, wouldn't I? But I think that is the number one thing. Whoever, but make sure they're experienced, they've been in the industry long enough, the grey hair, no hair, get educated. Now, that's the cop-out. So I'm going to say one thing that you've got to absolutely do to make sure you get things right. I'm going to bring it back to now your numbers, okay? Because you have to know what you're doing to get your numbers right. And so numbers is what drives this. It's not emotion. I had a lot of students come to me and I have to knock the emotion out of them in the nice way. This is, as I go back to my point earlier, it's a business. Treat it as a business. You're not going to live in this. I'm assuming you're not. So don't go, well, I'd like to decorate it like this. Whatever your demographics are, design and specify to that. And that's where your numbers are. And if you don't know where your numbers have come from or how those numbers are made up, or absolute confidence that they are the correct numbers, i.e. supplied by the right industry professionals, then do not move forward. Because I think everything else falls around it. It's a business. A business only makes profit, whether you're a coffee shop, a car garage, a financial institution, if you know your numbers and you have a plan of how they work. Know your numbers and your business will be okay.
Okay, fantastic. And what a massively comprehensive interview. I really didn't envisage we were going to cover as much depth. So if you're a YPN member and you're reading this in your hard copy magazine or online on the membership site, or you're listening to this as part of a podcast, or you're watching this on YouTube, wherever you are, and you're interested in property development and, you're ready to make the next step, or you think you're ready to make the next step, then I would say that the next step is probably drop into Google, Property CEO, get onto the website, follow Ritchie, go on the YouTube channel, read the book, start following the team there. They're a great team of people. We've had the pleasure and privilege of working with them for a number of years now. Don't make the mistakes that so many make along the way that we've discussed in detail. And Richie's made some, and I've definitely made a few as well. So avoid somebody else's mistakes, I guess, is a good way to put this. So Richie, thank you so much. We couldn't do what we do at YPN without people like yourself sharing your true expertise and knowledge and experience with us and our members. Thank you.
Thank you.
One wrong move can cost you thousands. Learn from others' mistakes. ypn.plus.